Everyone, welcome to Pepo Coin channel. If you're new to the channel, I hope you'll subscribe by the end of this video. We have seen some noteworthy sentiment-driven growth surrounding the XRP ledger over the past few days. In fact, they published an excellent essay discussing how XRP has essentially separated from the previous coin pack, rising by an additional 14% or more, and breaking above the $2.50 resistance level for the first time in 12 days, with a 6.5% increase in the last 2 months alone. Wallets containing at least 1 million XRP presently have 46.4 billion currencies. March has seen an explosion in address activity as well, with about 6 times as many unique wallets engaging on the network as in previous months. This is ridiculous, guys. We do now have, needless to say, the SEC's official decision to withdraw its appeal against Ripple today is likewise closely linked to this price increase. This occurred on the 19th, and Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse has already declared it a decisive win for the whole cryptocurrency community. However, I believe that this will likely continue, folks. In fact, I believe that over the next weeks, the XRP ledger and its surrounding ecosystem will continue to develop significantly because, once more, the current state of the cryptocurrency is a little gloomy, but I anticipate that this will also get much better. Numerous things have been happening, such as institutional-grade adoption and the regulatory side of things, which could potentially alter the course of this market almost instantly. Adoption of stablecoins is something we absolutely consider. We also examine stablecoin laws, such as the Genius Act, for instance. All of this is a major catalyst for cryptocurrency, but it can also be a catalyst for XRP. Additionally, keep in mind that we have begun to observe some developments about ETF staking, which may lead to much greater growth in trading volume. The trade war and tariff talks are the key reasons why I don't think cryptocurrency is particularly positive right now. Since even the dollar has been declining sharply, I believe that the big shift will occur almost immediately once everyone begins to really focus on risk on assets once more. That is, once we start to see those things cooling off a bit and once we start to see a little more of a flip on risk assets being the main driver. However, I believe that the following wave up will also cause a great deal of FOMO, since that's when I believe we start to break all-time highs on all fronts, including old coins, of course. However, aside from this, Brad Garlinghouse was at a summit lately, We began to see some conversations about what he anticipates happening this year while he was at the Blockwork Summit. Now that Brad Garlinghouse has given us some subjective insights, we can see what's going to happen. Pay attention. I believe that some of these technologies may now be unlocked because U.S. payment companies have not been as diligent about them. Take a look. How do you feel about where people will begin? Will they begin by making payments? Will custody be the first thing they address? Will they begin by taking stable coins? What sense do you have? We'll begin by sharing a brief story that I won't reveal, but let's get back to some of the regulatory garbage we've had to endure. In fact, one of Ripple's payment users debanked. We had deposits. From an infrastructure perspective, we are inside their firewall, and their compliance team determines that they are unable to bank us under this previous administration. You're thinking, oh my God, you must be kidding me, after we were debanked. I recall it. However, I believe that various people will have different preferences. Tier 1 banks are more inclined to focus on custody since they have clients and observe the trend toward tokenization of physical assets, which highlights the need for a strong, scalable custody solution. That is the main attraction for certain clients. That is one of the reasons we purchased this business a few years ago, nearly 2 years ago. Others, you see, are essentially more of an infrastructure play for payments, aren't they? I am undoubtedly in the vicinity of remittances and certain payment providers. Additionally, I believe that U.S. payment providers may suddenly unlock some of these technologies because they have not been as vigilant about them. I'm not answering the question, and I am aware that it may be a somewhat insufficient response. Simply said, I believe it will depend on the kind of bank. There are banks that consider themselves to be more global in scope. One of the interesting aspects, in my opinion, is that Sergey mentioned stablecoin legislation earlier on stage. Some Tier 1 banks have informed me that they might launch their own stablecoin denominated in US dollars. It's difficult for me to forecast how things will turn out, That also shows that they're leaning in more than they have in the past, And once more, I want to stress one thing to this audience. The tailwinds from the previous 6 months shift are being underestimated. Our industry has faced significant opposition from the world's largest economy, which is currently rapidly shifting in the opposite direction. We underestimate those tailwinds, in my opinion. And I concur with them entirely. Correct. We are underestimating what is going to happen, in my opinion. This is about to change. As you can see on the bottom right, Trump recently argued for the United States to become a Bitcoin superpower at the Digital Assets Summit. Recently, the SEC has been quite pro-crypto. Right now, it seems like everything in the cryptocurrency space is changing. Additionally, if we believe that this Ripple issue is essentially over, we only need to go back a little to January, when Morgan Stanley and even Bank of America stated that the banking sector would embrace cryptocurrency if U.S. regulators let it. Thus, the large storm cloud above cryptocurrency is essentially clearing away now. I refer back to my January post in which I mentioned that, following the victory in 2023, Ripple had confirmed that U.S. banks would want to utilize XRP. What does the conclusion of this case mean? Because, as CNBC stated, this was due to a partial triumph. What does this signify for U.S. banks now that the win is complete and a 100% success? Furthermore, I express my belief that the floodgates are going to open. According to Monica Long, the floodgates will open as well. I believe that there is going to be a significant change in the Ripple and possibly XRP markets. Additionally, Brad Garlinghouse has brought attention to Ripple on Bloomberg. Isn't this the message? Brad Garlinghouse has a major message for us. He is claiming that the SEC has dropped its appeal in the case against the business. Right now, the only thing we're fighting for is whether or not we want to battle to recoup the $125 million. Take a look. The conflict has lasted a long time. To what extent does this offer certainty? Is the case finished? Since the SEC had sued me, this gives Ripple a great deal of certainty, at least for me personally. The SEC has given up on its appeal. Thus, in December 2020, they filed a lawsuit. In the summer of 23, we prevailed on the main points of the lawsuit. Judge Torres decided that XRP was not a security in and of itself. That quote is nearly exact. Approximately 8 months ago, the SEC filed an appeal. Additionally, they have now decided to withdraw that appeal. A cross appeal is still pending. Thus, we actually become plaintiffs instead of defendants. We are now in control of deciding how we wish to move forward. You're dropping it? We shall see. Being on the attack rather than the defense feels much better. We spent more than $150 million over the course of 4 years litigating that case, not just for Ripple but for the entire industry. The fact that this SEC, the Gensler SEC, was actively attempting to intimidate and carry out lawfare by bringing lawsuit after lawsuit against cryptocurrency companies, in my opinion, was crucial. Now, that's over it, and to be honest, I believe that's fantastic for the U.S. cryptocurrency market as well as for the industry as a whole. Therefore, why not end the lawsuit now if you're considering a new SEC? Why don't you clear the water or the pay? Yes, that is a possibility. Again, the SEC has stated unequivocally that, in hindsight, they would not have filed this action. In 2015 and 2016, the SEC court did decide that certain XRP sales that we made to accredited investors and institutions had qualified as securities. As a result, a $125 million fine is currently in escrow. That would be nice to have back. That is a possibility. Additionally, I believe there are certain subtleties to how this will unfold. However, it was crucial that we, and in fact the entire XRP community, understand that the case is, for all intents and purposes, done. This is no longer being pursued by the SEC.